Brother Mike Smellie has been more than a brother to us. He has come alongside us over time in many different ways. I know a preaching ministry, adult Sunday school ministry, visitation ministry, all the way to Yorton, Peter's Rock, the hospitals, all over. He has come to us in difficult times and has helped us along the rough waters. And so he's with us again tonight as he walked us through how is it that God has used different individuals along the journey to be examples as he carries out the mission for the redemption of humankind. And he's with us again tonight. We want to welcome him as he share what is it the Lord has laid on his heart through this study. So welcome, Brother Mike, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you there, Brother Noel. I appreciate your introduction, but more so, I I was touched listening to Cheryl, and one of the things that stood out in my mind, despite the fact of us being so separated in these COVID times, was the importance of the body, the church, where we can lift up people in prayer and support each other as they go through various challenges. And that in itself just ministered to me. The thought of how important it is to be part of the body. And I give God thanks for that and how it has manifested itself. Even when we are far away from each other, like seeing your face, Brother Noel, I mean, realizing that the connection is still there. Thanks be to God. We look into the Word of God this evening. And as we do, we say, Father, as you come to us through your word and manifest in your truth, cause us to see ourselves through your word and show us Christ in it, in your word, so that we will resort to his help for our own transformation in Jesus' name. Amen. We have been doing this study, and I hope you have been as excited to come and look at this each time as I have been in preparing and to present it. And no, you may not be as excited, but I still hope that you are glad to be a part of the study. We've been looking at these profile of personalities highlighted in Luke 22 to 23 in Jesus's journey to the cross. And as we have been looking at that, we have picked up certain aspects of it that, we have seen that Jesus was set in his mind, as the Bible said, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and recognizing though that Jerusalem also meant his destiny with the cross. And he still did not shrink from that particular task. He was set on going to Jerusalem to meet with that particular faith. But on the way, as Luke put it in what I refer to as his travel log, we see where we have encountered the various people, and we have been trying to learn the lessons of these lives. As I looked at a sub-theme, which I had more or less introduced us last week, that we see in this the true and false of humanity as revealed by the cross, the true and falsehood of humanity revealed by the cross. And so we saw Judas. We saw him be revealed as a false disciple because of a misunderstood program. And he was forcing implementation of what he thought the program should be. But also what we saw is that he had no genuine love for Christ. Then we saw Peter, and we saw in Peter false security. He was trusting his own abilities, his own righteousness, his own confidence. He was self-confident as to what he could do. And we saw behind that was spiritual pride. But that spiritual pride caused Peter to be transformed by humiliation. And in Peter, we saw a genuine love for Christ. It's interesting, sisters and brothers, that in our midst, we have both Peters and Judases. And you can see from how it was written, is that they seemingly did not know who Judas was, because he was numbered among the 12. And even when Jesus said one should betray me, they're asking one, turned to each other saying, is it I, Lord? And this challenges us to have a sense of discernment, to know the difference between a Judas and a Peter. Because we may be treating Peter as we should treat Judas, or we may be treating Judas as we should treat Peter. Just a byline from that. But as we continue this week, we come now to another personality. We know him as Pontius Pilate. And I just wanted to pause now to get your feedback on this. What do you think of Pontius Pilate? How do you view him? And I trust you did do some reading on this and came to your own viewpoint on Pontius Pilate before our session this evening. So let me hear from different people. What do you think of Pontius Pilate? I won't even cause you to do it like you did with Peter. I asked you for one word response there. I want you to tell me what you think of him and why. Who's going to take that challenge first? Nobody?
Reverend Smellie, I think Pilate was, I'm using a word here now, ambivalent, a double-minded man, and not really exercising that strength of character, whichever way he was, whatever decision he had to make, he eventually handed over Jesus to be crucified. And so it sums up Pilate to a large extent.
Good, interesting. Somebody else?
Rev, I was thinking more that he was more or less, more of anything else, a politician, because he really did not want to take responsibility to alienate any of the people who came to him, even though he personally did not believe Jesus was guilty of anything, but to ensure that he maintained his position. He first wanted to pass on Jesus to somebody else for decision to be made on him, and then when that failed, he turned back to them and asked the crowd, "What do you want me to do?" Mm-hmm. So I think he was really playing as much of a politician more than anything else.
Interesting, very interesting. See? Any other viewpoints?
Well, I think he was a weakling. Right? I think he knew what was right, but he did not do it. He tried to dance around the facts. He got all the warning from his wife, from whoever else, and he heard the evidence, and he ignored those evidence and pandered to the noise on the outside, the crowd. Like my brother said, he's more of a politician than someone who wants to do the right.
politician, but not someone with principles.
Right.
Somebody else, to take another viewpoint here.
A couple of comments from YouTube.
Yeah.
Sister Sonia Beaton Bogle suggests an ambassador who did not want to alienate the constituency.
Mm-hmm.
Sister Marcia Lincook suggests a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
And Sister Sonia further commented wanted to just go with the flow and enjoy the office.
That's a very good point. Yeah, thanks for all of that. You see, I at the foot of this picture, I put there certain things here. Wicked. Some people look at him as weak. Some unfortunate, tragic, fickle, conflicted. These are various views of Pilate that has been there over the years. But some people, by describing him as tragic, look with a great deal of saying he should be pitied because of what he went through. And indeed, certain traditions, because there's not much said about Pilate in history other than his relationship with what happened with Jesus, which is interesting. And there's some legends that have been developed over this. Well, one of the ones is that actually Pilate's wife, I can't remember what her name was. I read it earlier on and just slipped it out. Pilate's wife actually became a Christian believer, and Pilate himself did afterwards. That is some view. And to support that view, you'll find that his wife and Pilate and his wife have been listed among the saints of certain traditions in the Orthodox churches. The Coptic Church, for example, and the Greek Orthodox, I think, have Pilate also among the saints of those people. So you have these various views. I mean, and that would surprise us to hear that. But let's do our own look at it this evening. I'll start by first presenting a sort of background to how Pilate would come around, or how he came to be where he is. And to do that, you have to understand, you'll see that slide I have there, understanding how Roman governance operated in Palestine. First of all, you know that Rome was the empire of the day and had been the empire for about 300-400 years before this time. And with Rome dominating the way they did, one of the things you learn about the Roman Empire and how they operated, most important to them, was trying to have peace in the empire. Because the empire had spanned such a wide area, it was the first large or massive empire in human history. And the Empire of Rome went from the northern Africa, from the regions up about Morocco, there about Tunisia. And it went right along up by Syria and came around nearby by Turkey, Egypt and Turkey, went across there into Europe, from Italy, going up through France, until it went up into Britain. So you'll find it up to today, you'll know if you are someone who has ever visited Britain, you'll know that they would have their Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian was one of the emperors, and the wall that he had installed there in Britain. So Rome, it was a vast empire. But one of the things that caused Rome to be so successful at running such a vast empire with such a variety of people and different nationalities and countries is because they were able to implement what is called Roman law, the rule of law. So that's the predominant thing, not a king as such, but the law was dominant. And the other thing you'll find in the Roman Empire is that they facilitated native rulers that would operate under Rome's control. So That's why they were so accommodating to various religions, because they wanted everybody to have their own religion, run the country their own way. And the only thing they said, your allegiance ultimately would be to Rome, and make sure you collect the taxes. So that's how Rome operated at that particular time. In Palestine in particular, there was what was established, the Herodian dynasty. And how that Herodian dynasty, you have heard about the Herods. And how that came around, it's by a series of, couldn't nearly call it accidental, some curious ways in which they came to be there. During what, from the Bible point of view, we look upon this as the intertestamental time, and names that would be familiar to you would be things like the Maccabees, and who were leading the rebellion for the Jews against the Greeks, when the Greeks were then the empire. And when they had a ruler called John Hyrcanus, who was a priest who became a ruler. And when he became a priest ruling over that Palestinian, over Judea, he conquered Samaria and he conquered Idumea. Idumea was a region which was previously Edom. And when he did that, he forced the people in these places to become Jews. It's interesting how this backfired later on, because after a while, when Rome took over, Rome wanted to put what they regard as a native ruler over this region of Samaria, Judea, and Idumea. And they chose or selected an Idumean whose name was Herod, and installed him to say he represented the Jews in that region. You know, he was not a genuine Jew. He was a forced Jew, but he played up to Rome, played up to the emperors, and he was imposed on that whole region. That's how you got the beginning of the Herods. First one, of course, you know, is Herod the Great. And after he died, he split up the kingdom over his four of his offspring. And then you had Herod Archelaus, who controlled that region as well. And if you know anything, here's where the Bible comes in. Herod the Great was reigning when Jesus was born. He was the one who was such an insecure, wicked person that wanted children to be killed because he thought that there was one who was born who was going to be king of the Jews. And since he carried the title of king, even though he was subject to Rome, they allowed him to carry this title of king. He was very nervous that someone would replace him because this person would be a genuine Jew, and he knew he was not a genuine Jew. And he was cruel. But after he died, the person who replaced him representing that Palestinian region was Archelaus, one of his sons. And if you remember the story, when Joseph and Mary had Jesus and had run away from Herod and went down to Egypt, when the angel told them to come back to the land, when they came back and they realized that Herod Archelaus was ruling over that region of Judea and Samaria, and they knew he was such a wicked person, that's why they did not settle in that part, and they went north to the Galilean region, which was under another Herod Antipas. And because Archelaus was so cruel. Later on, his cruelty caused the Jews to complain about him, and they complained to the Emperor Augustus, and said, we can't tolerate this man ruling over us. And he was immediately demoted by the emperor for his cruelty. And the emperor decided to replace him by a Roman governor. No longer native, a Roman governor. No. And the first person that he did it with was Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate would report directly to the emperor, which was unusual because in many of the Roman colonies or provinces, the person who was there would report to the Roman Senate, not directly to the emperor, but he made him report to the emperor. One of the main reasons behind that is because it was a known fact that the Jews were constantly agitating and fighting against authority and willing to overthrow and fight against whoever was there. That's their history. Constantly fighting. There's that Jacob streak of a struggler in them, and they were constantly fighting. So he wanted to make sure there's a Roman governor who would have power in that region and keep things under control. Because the most important thing to Rome was what is known as the Pax Romana, keep the peace of Rome. Now, so Pilate, that's how Pilate got there. I know I probably have bored you tremendously with that portion of that history. But so Pilate really resided, the Roman headquarters at that time was what was known Caesarea by the Sea, Caesarea Mauritius or something like that, by the sea, which interestingly is one of the few places there is evidence. The archaeologists have discovered a stone, and those of you who have ever made the trip to the Holy Land, and they would have taken you to that place called Caesarea by the Sea, because Herod had also built a palace down there, one of the 5 palaces he built. And they'll always show you a rock that carved into that rock is the name of Pontius Pilate. And they say this is evidence that this is not a fictional person. Nothing that historians and Bible people try to imagine. Pilate was a real person. That rock is still there. And you can Google it to find out about the rock with Pontius Pilate on it. By his residence is there, Caesarea by the Sea. Now, periodically, you'd make trips into up to Jerusalem when there were festivals there to make sure things were going okay. So happened now that this was near Passover, if you know from reading the story that we're dealing with. Near Passover, so Pilate would definitely pay a visit up to Jerusalem at that time. And that slide you have before you, we'll be covering tonight Luke 23, 1 to 25. Luke 23, 1 to 25. And when you'll see how they then reverted to Pilate at that point. I'm just looking in certain of the backgrounds to Pilate and power, because you see the caption I have there, Pontius Pilate, false power, avoiding responsibility. William Barclay, which is a theologian and historian, mentioned something here under this topic. I have a question of power. Pilate began his Judean term by a power overreach. That's my wording of what Barclay wrote. He marched into Jerusalem just after he was appointed. He took the army, marched from Caesarea into Jerusalem, and he placed an ensign. Not, they didn't march with flags then. They usually march with a pole to identify who they are. And he had the ensign with the image of the Roman Empire, a Roman emperor on these poles. This the Jews hated. Don't mess with the Jews with images. They know from their law that you must have no graven images. And so they rebelled. And they kept on rebelling when that happened. And Pilate, of course, tried to put down his foot, or his fist, I should say, upon them, probably killed a few of them in that rebellion. In the end, Pilate had to back down because he realized he could not, kill a whole nation in dealing with this particular rebellion. And Rome was going to be upset with him because Rome did not like disturbances. So that's the first thing we saw, the idea of Pilate's power, which was misused. The next thing we realize in this is that the Jewish Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish elders, the ruling elders for the Jewish nation, they did not have the power of life and death. Execution had to be ratified by the Roman governor. There are some interesting implications of all of that. Because when you'll read where Pilate, when he said, well, you go deal with him. I had a passage there in John chapter 18, verse 31, where you see, he said, let me just turn to that right now. You'll see Pilate say to them, take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws. The Jews said, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. They did not have that power because Rome did not allow them to have that power. Every now and then they broke out and they did their own thing, and then Rome would have to come in and deal with them for doing it. So here is Pilate realizing he is a powerful man. Rome gave Pilate, as a governor, the power of life and death over the people in these areas. Now, it's interesting that later on we see when Jesus was standing before Pilate, and I'm here shifting a bit to John because John's account was a much more detailed account on some of this. In John's account, when Pilate refused to answer him, Pilate tried to make claims of power. Pilate said to him, you won't speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority? And certain versions, I'm sure in the authorized version, King James Version will say, the power to release you and the power to crucify you. What Pilate was saying there, that power is the exousia, that authority to do that was legally true, but not the truth. It was a false claim, and Jesus immediately retorted to him and said, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Can you imagine Jesus standing before Pilate, Pilate representing all the power of the empire, Pilate representing the military might of Rome, Pilate having the legal authority to commit someone to die. And when he looked at Jesus and said, do you not realize I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you? Jesus could look him right back in the eye and say, you have no power at all. It's a question of power. And Pilate was trying to exhibit and act out a false power that he thought he had. Jesus corrected him there. Any questions in that so far? You still with me on that?
Yeah, still with you, Rev.
Still here, Rev.
Okay. Well, I can trust the voice of Cleve. So I should give me an assurance that you're there with me. All right. So it seems as if there are no questions with that. Now, when we come to that, it's where I see Pilate as an individual. One, he is sensitive to his position, sensitive to his power, and here is somebody who seemingly is his captive telling him that you can strut your stuff, but you have no power at all because you are linked to the wrong place. So it led me to the other point there, the question of power. True power is not dependent on approval of people or responsive to pleasing people. Rather, it is based on if you want to have real power, you first need to be submitted to the powerful God, who is one who can determine your beginning and the end. When you see someone who thinks their power comes from the people, you will realize someone who has a false sense of power, because the people will lift you up and they will dispose of you. You should not be dependent on people for your sense of power. If you act out just responding to please people, if you become a people pleaser, they have you under their control. You are indeed a weakling. Therefore, because you know how people are, they are fickle. They will raise you up today and say, Hosanna. The next time they will say, crucify you. Don't trust power. Don't trust people as a basis of your power. Be submitted to God. And that comes out in our lives as well, because many of us respond, and especially when we were growing up and when there was a dangerous stage of our lives, particularly in teenage years, where we suffer under peer pressure. We want to be acceptable to the crowd. We act to please people. We withhold holding to the truth of the Lord and the word of God. We know what is right in our minds. But in order not to feel like an outsider, in order to feel that we can fit in, we many times put our lives under the control of others' approval, rather than getting the approval of God when we're dealing with a question of power. I think one of the great statements of that came from Paul, as I have that quotation there in Galatians 1 verse 9. When Paul, and if you read Galatians, you'll see Paul at his strident best with very harsh words, as if he was fighting a battle against people. Of course, understandably, it was his first epistle that he was writing. But he had an issue. He was fighting it very strongly. And one of the accusations against him is that you are not a genuine apostle, and whatever you're preaching is not approved by the people in Jerusalem. And Paul, when he got into this in Galatians chapter 1, he said, obviously, I'm not trying to win approval of people. I'm reading this from the New Living Translation, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. And I will challenge all our minds, and I know I've been guilty of it as much as any of us, that there are times when we are seeking to please people. But Paul says, when you are seeking to please people, you are not being Christ's servant. If you are Christ's servant, only one master you have, only one person needs to be pleased, is Christ himself, not subjected to people. So that's what we saw in Pilate. Now, I really should have stopped and got you to do some reading here of the passage. Luke 23, 1 to 25. Could I get about 3 readers to read through that passage to make sure that we are, some people may not have read it before, and I wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page in reading that. I'll bring up one version, the version I use mostly, which is the English Standard Version, but you can read it in whatever version. Could I get someone to begin reading? Luke 23, 1 to 25.
Then the whole company of them arose, says verse 1, and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. Stop.
You passing the baton to someone else?
Yes, or you want me to go on?
All right, go on to verse go to verse 12 and then someone else can take it.
Okay. So we're at 7. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this, they had been at enmity with each other.
Wonderful.
All right, I'll continue now. Verse
Yes.
13.
Yes.
13 to until what?
25.
All right, verse 13, I'm reading from the NIV.
Go ahead.
Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence, and I have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And as you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." With one voice, they cried out, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their voice and their shouts prevailed. 24 and last. So Pilate decided to grant their demands. 25, he said. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will.
Thanks very much to the readers. There you see an equivocating Pilate, shifting from one position to the other. He knew in his heart what should be done. But as people being a people pleaser, he succumbed to what they're doing. So let's look at this. Let's look at another thing. What was the charge presented to Pilate about Jesus? What was the charge presented to Pilate? Verse 2 says, "And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We have found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.'" Note, if you note this, that This charge was not the charge that was mentioned before the Sanhedrin. In chapter 22, you will have read the charge they brought before him when he appeared before the elders and the leaders of the Sadducees. When they brought him before the leaders, the main charge they had at that time was the fact that you say that you are God. In fact, if you go back to chapter 22, they said of Luke, it said, if you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated. From now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, are you the Son of God then? And he said to them, you say that I am. Then they said, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it for ourselves from our own lips. That was a charge that they took him on, and that charge is called blasphemy. Now, what is interesting about this is that when they went before Pilate, nobody mentioned about blasphemy. Could someone tell me, therefore, why did they not use this charge when they came before Pilate?
For Rome, it probably was not a sentence of death, nothing worth dying for.
Absolutely correct. As far as Rome was concerned, and hence Pilate was concerned, that's your domestic problem. I don't even know what blasphemy means, because you talk about a God that you serve, and you're talking about somebody who acts as if they are a God. That's, you go work that out among yourselves. I don't really care about this. Certain other records of this make this even more plain, like if you read John's account of it. He's saying that you go sort this out among yourselves. So this makes no sense. And Rome was very strict on following law. So they shifted gears by the time they got before Pilate. And what they accused him from before Pilate, which of course, they never brought this up before him, but they got people to support it. First of all, sedition. You mislead the nation. You are arousing this nation to think about you. That's what he said in chapter 2. We found this man misleading our nation. That's regarded as sedition. Pilate would be very interested in this, and Rome would be as well. The next thing they saw, it was insurrection. You bid him to pay taxes. Now, if you wanted something to get Rome's attention, you mentioned about the money, because Rome was very strict about getting taxes paid. They accused Jesus of forbidding them to pay taxes. Let me ask you, anyone could say, now, do you think anything Jesus said would have given them grounds of saying that he was forbidding them paying taxes? Paying tribute to Caesar?
I really don't think so.
You don't think so?
No. I remember him saying that give unto Caesar what is Caesar's when they asked him about the tax. And he got the coins out of the fish's mouth. And, you know, that's all.
But you see, they twisted something like this to say that, because remember when they asked him the question, they were asking him, tempting him to see what he would say. See, should we pay tax to Rome? And the Lord said, and Jesus said, well, give me a coin. Whose inscription is on it? They said, Caesar. He said, well, render to Caesar what is Caesar. But he never stopped there. And unto God, what is God? And they used that and twisted it and said he was forbidding people to pay taxes. The other thing is that the next thing they accused him of was treason, that he was making himself king. Was that true?
Not
No.
at all.
No.
He wasn't thinking about an earthly kingdom at all.
Right? But they're not going to look at it and say it's not an earthly kingdom. They said he did say that was a key question. You'll note that Pilate kept asking him, "Are you a king?" And Jesus' response is, "You said it." In fact, in John's report on it, he said, "But my kingdom is not of this world, or else my servants would fight for me."
So they weren't lying.
So what?
So from their perspectives, and if it's perspective and you look at from their perspective, they weren't lying because he did say that.
He said it, but but he explained what he meant. He's in fact made himself a different type of king. And they knew that. And trust me, you'll see that Pilate examined the evidence they brought. And what Pilate said in the end, Dion?
Well, he himself didn't believe it because he said he found no fault in him.
No, he said there was not any guilt that
Guilt
he
in him,
saw in
right.
that. So the
So
evidence, the
so he
charge was
understood the
not supported
perspective.
by evidence.
Yes.
And bear in mind, this is not what they accused him of when they were in their own assembly. So they knew it was a lie. 3 times Pilate declared he did not find Jesus guilty. You'll see there in 23:14, 23:22, and he claimed that even Herod, because when he palmed Jesus over to Herod, because Pilate was trying to escape the problem, the thing we have seen it, when they passed him over to that, he could he was looking for Herod to probably make the decision for him. And Herod, of course, did not find any evidence either because Herod was looking for some gamesmanship. But he said to them afterwards, not even Herod, verse 15, could find anything to accuse Jesus is. Look, nothing deserving of death was found in him. So the question is asked then, why then allow Jesus to be passed over for crucifixion? What I showed there is Pilate shifting responsibility. He passed the responsibility back to the Jews and said, well, you deal with it in your own way, your own legal means. You deal with it. And they said, but we can deal with it, but we can't execute him or as we read before, because we haven't got the power of life and death. He's tried to shift it to Herod. Herod sent Jesus back to him. Then he tried unjustified imprisonment and abuse. Said, okay, I will imprison him, I will scourge him, I will punish him, then release him. And they said, no, 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 crucify him. As a last resort, he said, okay, take Barabbas. They said, no, no, release Barabbas, but crucify Jesus. So Pilate was definitely trying to shift responsibility. Yet the power, the pressure of the people prevailed. Luke 23, verse 23. The pressure of the people prevailed. Think about that. When we see the pressure of the people prevailing above principle. Then in 24, therefore he granted their demand. He granted what they asked for. And he delivered Jesus to their will. 23:25. There was Pilate who thought he was powerful. And if you were powerful, wouldn't you do what you realize your belief, your conviction is? But no, because it was a false power, he therefore tried to avoid responsibility. You know, what you could look upon that is that Pilate was conflicted. And Jesus and the cross reveal that contradiction. Jesus and the cross reveal that contradiction. When you claim power that you don't possess, you succumb to the pressure of the people. And after you have made that decision, succumb into them, then you seek to avoid the responsibility for your part in the crucifixion. No wonder afterwards, after this was all done, in Matthew's record, and it's interesting reading the various records on this. And I was hoping in your preparation for this, you would have used the various gospels to see how they did, because many expanded a lot more than Luke did on this. And you can get snippets from that, even though I'm focusing particularly on Luke's account. But in Matthew, you'll see that after Pilate did it, what he tried to do, Matthew 27, verse 24, he said, let me wash my hands to claim innocence. This was something you took from the Deuteronomy, where they said, if you find a dead person outside the city and you can't find who killed that person, then the leaders of the city, after dealing with the body, shall wash their hands to show their innocence. Pilate was trying to wash his hands. You see, those of you who have done some reading of Shakespeare, you remember in Lady Macbeth, when Lady Macbeth trying to say, look at these spots on my hands, trying to wash it away, and the spots could never disappear, because there is nothing you can do to calm a guilty conscience. Even though you're going to say, I did not find him guilty, but you are responsible. Pilate even tried to compensate later on by trying to upset the Jews. Remember, after he was crucified, we read this in John chapter 19, he gave this inscription that should be put over the cross that says, this is Jesus, King of the Jews. And the Jews came back to him and said, change that, Pilate, and put that he said he was the King of the Jews. Pilate said, I won't. What I have written, I have written. He is your king. And you got him crucified. You know what's so horrible about that? And if you read Matthew's story about this, you'll read that the Jews said to Pilate when he said, you are one demanding his demise. And Pilate said, and the Jews said to him, his blood be upon our shoulders, upon our children and our children's children. This has been like a curse on the Jewish nation ever since, because it is something that has followed them afterwards, because when they said it, in fact, at one stage they said, we have no king but Caesar. They gave up Jesus for Caesar. And they said his blood be upon us. That's written in Matthew's account as well. Now, I want to put it back to you and say, what lessons do you get from this? Let me hear some people. Let me hear your feeling on this. What lessons you've taken away from this story of Pontius Pilate, false power, avoiding responsibility? Let me hear your own application of this.
Okay, I'll speak because I'm a lecturer and I hate the silence, especially on Zoom. Right. So reflecting on it, Rev, I am just thinking that in positions of leadership, you have an awesome responsibility. And, you know, sometimes we, under pressure, we try to avoid, being responsible and, behave as if we are innocent, but even not doing anything makes us guilty and makes us responsible. And so we have to acknowledge our real position as leaders and know our values, know what we stand for, and be decisive about what we need to do. We just hope that our values are informed by the correct source.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dion. Very true. I would like to hear an application which is not just the leaders, but to just children of God or believers in your day-to-day life. How can this apply?
I was just thinking that in life, you'll find that you might find that you know what is right, but the popular feeling is otherwise. But as a child of God, you have to make that decision that you're going to do the right thing, because in the end, you're going to have that burden on your shoulder. You're going to have that millstone around your neck to deal with. And I think, well, that was the case with Pilate, because in the end, he realized, although he found Jesus not guilty, he allowed himself to be swayed by what was happening around him. And as a result, he made a decision that he himself wasn't happy with in the end. So we really should stand up for what we believe in, or we fall for things that we really, in the end, don't like.
Absolutely. Very much so. That's where a good counterpoint to this would be the dare to be a Daniel type of dare to stand alone, stand away from the crowd, because you serve Christ. You don't serve people. And any others before I make another app? Any other thoughts on that?
Well, are you hearing me?
Yeah, sure.
One of the applications that keep resonating with me is the same question that Pilate put to the crowd, which is, so what are you going to do with Jesus? Right?
What shall you do with
And
Jesus?
it seems to me that if you have ever heard of or encountered Jesus, then you are going to have to give an account of what you did, what decisions you would have taken after you found out who Jesus is.
Very well doing. Maybe that's where that song from What Shall You Do with Jesus? Neutral.
Rev, may I add something?
Go ahead, Ali.
I am just thinking though that many times we face situations in life and we come under different types of attacks, sometimes abuses, and we ourselves, how we respond to it is critical, because Jesus Christ had already told him that he didn't really have the power. Only what is given unto him, what is allowed. Right? And many times we face situations and we tend not to respond in that kind of way. We sometimes may even try to deal with it ourselves. But it helps me to understand that consulting with God and allowing him to work it through is even more than what I myself could do in dealing with the situation. So if I'm thinking about a life situation, that's one of the things that came to me in thinking about a life situation.
Very true, and we appreciate that. Certainly. I could have In this study tonight, there's so many different applications, and I had to be careful because, of course, I'm going to have to finish Barnabas as well, because that's not very long. But
Sorry, Rev.
yes, please.
Just one quick comment from YouTube, Charlotte Dinal.
Right.
Even if you choose not to act, you're still accountable.
That's it. That's it. Not acting still make you. That's why I say I remember that song. What shall you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. One, because you're going to give an account. One day your heart will be asking, what did you do with Jesus? Pilate said, well, let me just go to the applications, some of the applications there. Who was responsible for Jesus' crucifixion? Let me, well, because in the interest of time, I won't even, and since many are shy to respond quickly enough.
Right.
Question is it Pilate? Is it the Jews? Who is responsible?
Right. I think the whole thing what was set out from the beginning after man fell, right, in the Garden of Eden, and they were there as a facilitator of the crucifixion. So it was all part of the play or ride to get it done. That man would be forgiven as a result of Jesus dying.
The problem with that, Hervin, though, is that you're putting yourself like in God's position. If you're taking a divine perspective on this. And the fact is that if you take that perspective, it doesn't exonerate humanity from their responsibility.
No, I'm not saying that, but
because
if you facilitate something that is not good. But look, I'm going to put it in our context now. There's a scripture that says, God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. And God sees and knows how it is going to be done. He knows all of this. So somebody has to be there for all of this to take place. And although they're wrong, but you see, God knows people, knows all of us, and knows our intentions. And people are there who will not accept him, and people are there who would support him. So that's how I look at it.
You may look at it that way, but I'm saying, God knew that Pilate was going to be there. He knew Jesus was going to be crucified. But I tell you what happened. They held full responsibility because they made that choice. Let me give you, when Peter was preaching about this later on, and I've really cut this in the interest of time. When Peter was preaching about this, before on the day of Pentecost when he preached, he said, you took him by your hands. He's talking to the Jewish leaders now. And you passed him over to the Romans. And you caused him to be crucified. You are responsible. A great verse of that is Acts 4, verse 27. For truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. And this is a prayer of Peter. Both Herod, Pontius Pilate, along with Gentiles and the people of Israel. What Peter was really saying in that prayer is everybody is responsible.
All right.
It means that you and I are equally responsible.
Yeah, that is true. But I was just thinking about when Jesus was in the temple and they tried to capture him and he just walked through the crowd. Why he didn't do that at the last after Gethsemane? So you see, everything was. I mean, how is it? It was all orchestrated, and God knew what he was doing.
He didn't do serving, so that you and I would bear full responsibility for his death.
Yes, I know, because his coming and his dying was because of sin, which we all are sinners.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Rev, quick question for you then. If you follow along with what Brother Hervin has just said, then would you hold Judas accountable for what he did?
Based on Hervin's argument, you probably wouldn't, because you're going to say
Say that.
it was all part of the plan. But Judas is very much responsible. And the point is that we claim false power, then we try to avoid the responsibility. We say, look here, I didn't cause myself to do it. And so therefore, I'm not guilty. I shouldn't suffer as a result of that. And God is said, you had a choice. You are responsible. And I'll summarize it by this, and I must say I'm sort of cutting to the chase a little bit. We will
But
be
as persons, we know we have our free will. God gave us
that's
that.
it.
So it is at that point, they could have decided that, listen, I'm not, well, in the case of Pilate, he
Yeah.
could have said that, listen, I don't find the man guilty, and I'm in a position of power, leadership. I will take the decision and I will let the man go freely.
Absolutely.
But he didn't. And
That's
and you know, the weaknesses and all that crept in, and that's why he relented.
That's right. And so, and therefore, one of the challenge of all of this that affects our lives and everything we do, something that we don't like to think about many times, is that we are going to have to give an account one day for every one of these decisions. And we're going to be judged not on what we say we believed. You can have a good theology, you could have a good reasoning, but you're going to be judged on what you do, what you did. Every one of us will give account for our actions. So,
Rev, if I could say,
yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of what happens is looking back at the nature of man, the character of man, and the vulnerability and the how much where he can be easily swayed. And I think when you search the scripture and you see how a number of persons prayed, the psalmist especially, he asked for his heart to be guarded, his
Mhm.
mind, and even as a child of God, I think we become even more vulnerable and tempted. And
Mhm.
so we have to be so alert because we can be used for evil,
That's
to
right.
do wrong so easily. And as the body in the body of Christ, you find it. And when people fall, it becomes a big thing. But but we have to recognize that we all have a responsibility to pray up each other and to support each other, as even the man who is leading as a shepherd. So I think a lot of times we tend not to focus on our own nature and the vulnerability of our nature.
That's right, true. Thanks for saying that. That's why I ended by saying, do our actions or lack of submission to God lead us to crucifying Jesus in our daily lives? And that's a question that we really have to think about many times. Okay, let's quickly deal with Barabbas. Not much is said there, but Barabbas is this intriguing personality that that emerges quickly on the pages of history. And as soon as he emerges, we read nothing else about him. And because of this, we nearly have to end up making with certain, because the Bible is silent on a lot of this, a lot of what we do would be conjecture. But yet still, there's such a powerful lesson to be learned about Barabbas. As I put it, Barabbas signified true submission and true salvation. You notice that I'm continuing with the false and the true, false power. Now we see true submission, true salvation. Intriguing name he had, Barabbas, because we know Bar means son of, and in Aramaic, son of. And if Abbas, meaning like you have Abba, his name would mean son of a father. But some commentaries would ask the question, could it be son of a rabbi? Could it be that Barabbas was the son of an outstanding leader in that community? It was quite possible. It was quite frequent that we found that zealots emerged in that Israeli landscape because they wanted to overthrow the Roman government. And that happens so frequently. If you read again the Gospels, you'll see people have been saying, well, if it's another insurrectionist Jesus, it'll soon die out because we have had so many of them and they all died out. But Barabbas, was he another one? The biblical information on Barabbas said, we'll read it in Luke chapter 23, that he was in prison, he was accused of insurrection, he was accused of murder. From Matthew's gospel, we read that he was a notorious prisoner. In Mark, we read he committed murder in an insurrection. So it means that it seems as if Barabbas did lead an insurrection against the Romans. And in that he committed murder, and that's why he was in prison. And obviously he was destined to die for that. John said he was a robber, but that Greek word that he used for a robber can be also a word used for the insurrection. So that's as much as we know about the background of this character called Barabbas. What is interesting is that as I had this in mind and musing on it and preparing for this week, I got my copy of Christianity Today just about 2 days ago, and it had a most intriguing article that there was more to Barabbas than we see, than meets the eye. And of course I said, whoa, look at timing. This was so great to get that. And they did a big bang up job on making these comparisons about that. But here it is. Look at Barabbas. Barabbas, what we found about him, it looks like I'm missing a slide here, is he was guilty of sedition, insurrection, and treason. Note that. Barabbas was guilty of sedition, insurrection, and treason. Who else was guilty of that? Who was, sorry, I should say guilty. Who was accused of this?
Those were the charges against Jesus.
Jesus.
Those are the charges against Jesus. Barabbas was guilty of all these charges. Jesus was accused but innocent of these charges. So what you had in a situation here is that Jesus didn't die instead of Barabbas. In place of, he was more than that. He was a perfect substitute for Barabbas. And that is so beautiful to see. He was a perfect substitute for it, because what Barabbas was guilty of, Jesus was falsely accused of, and Jesus took the punishment for these crimes that Barabbas had already committed. And what you saw beautifully there is the innocent man was paying the price so that nothing is remained for the guilty man to pay. And there you get a picture of what I refer to as perfect substitution. He was Barabbas's perfect substitute. And you may say, well, okay, big deal. Why you feel so excited about that? The point is that that's the basis of salvation, that God comes as our substitute in Jesus, and Jesus took everything that we were guilty of. He is innocent of it, but he takes that punishment, dies in our place, and that's where we get salvation. That's what Barabbas signified. So here it is. It's interesting also that, and this part of it came from the article that I read there, but The governor, it was a big deal that the governor said, at this time, I usually offer somebody to be released for your Passover celebration and to keep the benevolence of Rome showing. I'll cause you to get one of your prisoners released. You know who Pilate thought they were going to say to release? Obviously, the innocent man, Jesus of Nazareth. No, they said, no, give us Barabbas. Release Barabbas. The governor offers mercy. The guilty receives it and is released. The innocent is refused and is condemned. Ah, boy. But that's the beauty of salvation, because true salvation, as Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. If you could have conjectured there, someone dramatizes in an interesting way and said, but Barabbas was in the shadows, way behind in another room or somewhere of the palace. And he heard the cry from a crowd. And the crowd is saying, crucify him, crucify him. Barabbas, there in his mind, said, okay, my hour is now come, because they're crying out, crucify him. He comes forth, and rather than being dragged by the soldiers to be crucified, he found himself released, and instead, the innocent Jesus being taken away to be crucified. What a celebration for Barabbas. And I've thought to myself, can you imagine if Barabbas then, and I could put it beyond reason, that he probably would make his way to the cross to see it. And when he looked up at the cross, he saw the one in the center. And Barabbas could turn to his family and to his friends and say, he is dying in my place. Where I should have died, he is dying. My substitute. You know, when I thought of this, one of the songs that came to my mind is there's one, I don't know if it was James Cleveland, who, well, he took the, he dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges, you know, on Calvary. I heard him said, case dismissed, go thy way. And then he had that wicked bass line afterwards.
That's Grace Thrillers.
What's that? What is it? What is it, Jerry?
Grace Thrillers.
It was Grace Thrillers. No, well, Grace Thrillers did that, but the American group did it first, before Grace Thrillers followed it. But he dropped the charges. I always used to like that particular thing. But theologically, it's not correct. The charges were not dropped. The charges were taken by our substitute. And so, as a result of that, for us to appreciate this, there's a song that I asked Angie to cue that she's going to be playing in a moment, just to say before I end. Read in advance for the ones we have for next week. And the ones for next week. And I'm really hoping that you guys bring whatever information you find on these things before. We're going to be looking at Simon of Cyrene. It'd be fascinating to study about what it means, Cyrene, or what is where is Cyrene and what it means. And then the righteous criminal. Who do you think is a righteous criminal?
The one who defended Jesus on the cross.
Right. He said, I'm guilty, I'm a criminal, and I'm dying. But he became a righteous criminal. Those are the who we're doing next week. But the song that Angie is going to cue is that Amazing Love. How can it be? You know, how it starts again, but he was condemned. I'm alive today because the Spirit, because he died and rose again. Amazing Love. Think about this song as she plays it, because that's a great picture of Barabbas. And he could have written this. Over to you, Andrew.